August. 480 BC. The sun had barely cleared the ridgeline of Mount Kallidromos when the earth began to tremble. Not from an earthquake, not from the gods. From feet, hundreds of thousands of feet, moving south, shaking the ground of northern Greece like a slow, deliberate drumbeat of annihilation. The Persian army of Xerxes, I stretched across the horizon like a jeweled serpent, bronze and silken iron, drawn from a dozen conquered nations, marching toward a narrow slit in the coastline called Thermopylae. The hot gates, waiting for them, roughly 7,000 Greeks. Most of them would leave before it ended. But 300 would not. 300 against an empire. This was not just a battle for territory. It was a battle for whether the idea of free men governing themselves would live or die, and the world would never be the same after what happened here. To understand why men chose to die at Thermopylae, you have to go back a decade to a flat plain east of Athens called Marathon. In 490 BC, the Persian Empire under Darius I had sent a professional invasion force across the Aegean to punish Athens for daring to support a Greek rebellion inside Persian territory. The Athenians, outnumbered, met them on the beach and destroyed them. It was one of the most improbable military upsets in ancient history, and it humiliated the most powerful empire on earth. Darius died before he could answer that humiliation. His son Xerxes inherited both the throne and the grudge. For 4 years, Xerxes prepared. He ordered a canal dug through the peninsula of Chalkidike so his fleet could avoid dangerous coastal waters. He had 2 enormous pontoon bridges constructed across the Hellespont, the strait separating Asia from Europe, using hundreds of lashed boats. When a storm destroyed the first bridge, Xerxes reportedly had the sea itself whipped 300 times and thrown in chains. That is who was coming. The Greeks knew. Scouts and informants had tracked the Persian buildup for years. A congress of city-states met and debated. Many Greek cities simply surrendered in advance, calculating that survival under Persian rule was better than annihilation. But Athens and Sparta refused. Sparta's king, Leonidas, had already given his answer when Persian heralds demanded he lay down his arms. Molon Labe. Come and take them. Leonidas was not young. He had lived the full brutal curriculum of Spartan training, stripped of comfort from age 7, forged through years of cold and hunger and violence into something less than human by ordinary standards and more than human by Sparta's. He chose his 300 personally. Every man a father. Every man with sons already born to carry on his line. He was not sending them to die carelessly. He was selecting witnesses. The oracle at Delphi had already spoken. Either Sparta would be destroyed, or a Spartan king would fall. Leonidas understood. He moved toward Thermopylae anyway. Meanwhile, Xerxes crossed into Europe with an army that ancient sources place at over 2 million, a figure modern historians reject as impossible. Conservative modern estimates still range between 100,000 and 250,000 men, drawn from every corner of the Achaemenid Empire: Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, Indians, Ethiopians, Lydians. When this army marched, Herodotus wrote, "Rivers ran dry because so many men drank from them." Whether literally true or not, the psychological reality was this: nothing like it had ever moved against the Greek world before. And almost everyone who stood in its path had already stepped aside. The pass of Thermopylae was not impressive to look at. It was barely 15 meters wide at its narrowest point, a compressed corridor between sheer limestone cliffs rising to the left and the cold gray waters of the Malian Gulf pressing in from the right. Hot sulfur springs bubbled along the base of the cliffs, giving the place its name. It smelled of rotten eggs and salt water and something ancient, but Themistocles and the Greek War Council had chosen this ground with cold precision. In open terrain, Persian numbers were an extinction event. In a 15-meter bottleneck, those same numbers became a liability. The Persians could not flank. They could not encircle. They could not overwhelm with sheer mass. Every attack would have to funnel through the same narrow throat, where Greek hoplites with longer spears, heavier armor, and disciplined formation fighting would meet them chest to chest. At the center of the Greek line stood the Spartans. Their weapon was the dory, an ashwood spear roughly 2.5 meters long, tipped with a leaf-shaped iron blade, counterweighted at the base with a bronze spike they called the lizard sticker. Behind their massive bronze-faced shields, the aspies, they fought not as individuals but as a single breathing machine, the phalanx, each man's shield covering the man to his left, the entire line moving, pushing, killing in unified rhythm. Alongside them stood 700 Thespians who had come knowing their small city had no walls and no escape if the pass fell. 400 Thebans were there too, though their loyalty to the Greek cause would prove complicated. Additional thousands of allied hoplites filled the line, anchoring the flanks against the cliff face and the sea. There was also a wall. An old Phocian defensive barrier crossing the pass had been repaired and reinforced. It gave the Greeks a hard anchor point at their backs, a place to fall to, a line that compressed the killing ground even further. The night before the Persians moved, something quieter happened inside the Greek camp. Spartan soldiers sat at the edge of firelight and combed their long hair. To an outside observer, it looked almost absurd, men preparing for certain death by grooming. But to a Spartan, it was not vanity, it was ritual. It was the same deliberate calm they brought to everything fatal. One soldier was overheard telling another that the Persian arrows were so numerous they would block out the sun. The other man smiled. "Good," he said. "Then we'll fight in the shade." Leonidas sacrificed at dawn. He offered animals to Heracles, the mythic ancestor of the Spartan royal line, and read the entrails with the army's diviner, Megistias. The signs, reportedly, were bad. Megistias told him so. Leonidas thanked him and sent his own son home. Megistias sent his son home too. Then he stayed. Across the narrow plain, Xerxes waited. 4 days he waited, certain the Greeks would see reason and retreat. They did not move. On the morning of the 5th day, he stopped waiting. Phase 1. The first wave, day 1. The sound came before the soldiers did a deep, pulsing roar of drums and war horns that rolled down from the Persian lines like a physical force, designed to loosen bowels and shatter nerve. Then the Medes came. Not Persians, yet Xerxes sent his subject troops first, the Medes and Elamites, wave after wave, into the throat of the pass. They died in layers. The Greek phalanx met them at the narrowest point and held. The Spartan line did not charge wildly. It advanced in controlled rhythm, spears thrusting low, shields pressing forward, the rear ranks pushing into the backs of the front ranks with their whole weight in the isthmus, the shoving match of massed bodies. Persian soldiers carried shorter spears and wicker shields, adequate weapons in open terrain, completely wrong for this geometry. They could not bring their numbers to bear. The men in the front rank died. The men behind them stepped over the bodies. They died too. The killing was mechanical, almost administrative. But the Greeks did not simply stand. They feigned retreat, drawing clusters of Persians forward, breaking formation, pulling the enemy into disarray, then wheeled and drove back into them with lethal precision. By midday, Persian dead were stacked in drifts against the cliff wall. Xerxes reportedly rose from his throne 3 times during the fighting. Not in triumph. In shock. Phase 2. The Immortals' Day. 2. On the 2nd day, Xerxes played his highest card. The Immortals were the absolute elite of the Persian military, a permanent corps of 10,000 men, so named because their number never changed, casualties instantly replaced to maintain the exact count. They were the best equipped, best trained soldiers in the empire. They had never failed. A silence fell over the Persian lines as they formed up. Even the Greeks behind their wall understood that something different was approaching. The Immortals entered the pass in perfect order, their equipment polished, their discipline absolute. They broke apart within an hour. The same geometry that had destroyed the Medes destroyed the Immortals. Longer Greek spears reached them before their own blades could find Greek flesh. The narrow pass had turned the most fearsome soldiers in the world into a queue of men waiting to be killed. By nightfall of the 2nd day, the Immortals had retreated. Xerxes sat on his throne overlooking the pass, and according to Herodotus, he rose and tore his robes. The Greeks had held for 2 full days. The greatest army ever assembled on earth could not break 7,000 men in a 15-meter corridor. Inside the Greek camp that night, men cleaned their weapons and spoke quietly. Some of them may have begun to believe the impossible was possible. They were wrong. Phase 3. The Betrayal. His name was Ephialtes. He was Greek from a village somewhere in the hills near Thermopylae. What drove him to Xerxes' tent that second night is not recorded. Perhaps money, perhaps a personal grievance, perhaps simple survival instinct dressed up as pragmatism. It doesn't matter. What matters is what he carried with him. Knowledge. There was another path. A narrow mountain track called the Anopaia wound up through the Kalidromos range, bypassed the pass entirely, and descended behind the Greek position. The Greeks knew about it. A small Phocian contingent had been posted there specifically to guard it. Ephialtes showed the Persians where it was and offered to guide them through the dark. That night, 20,000 immortals began climbing in silence. A Greek runner, some accounts say a deserter. Others say a scout arrived at the Spartan camp before first light. The Phocian guards on the mountain path had heard the Persians coming and retreated uphill to defend themselves, leaving the route open. By dawn, Persian soldiers would be descending behind the Greek lines. The pass had been turned. Phase 4. Leonidas chooses. What happened next is one of the most debated moments in ancient history, and the historian Charles Hignett called Leonidas's decision to stay an unsolved riddle that no evidence has fully explained. He sent the allied contingents away. Most of them, Corinthians, Arcadians, Mantineans, retreated south in good order. He kept the 300 Spartans. The 700 Thespians refused to leave, choosing death over the certain destruction of their undefended city. The 400 Thebans were held whether as willing fighters or reluctant hostages. Accounts disagree. Perhaps Leonidas had calculated that someone needed to hold the pass long enough for the retreating Greeks to reach safety. Perhaps the Spartan code offered him no other option. A Spartan did not retreat from the battlefield without his shield or on it, and there was nowhere left to go with it. Perhaps the oracle's prophecy had already settled something in him that argument could not disturb. He advanced. The remaining Greek force moved out from behind the wall for the last time, not to defend, but to attack. They pushed deep into the wider part of the pass, trying to inflict maximum casualties before the encirclement closed. The fighting was ferocious. Greek spears shattered. Men drew swords. Swords broke. Men fought with their hands and teeth. Leonidas fell somewhere in the thick of it, and the Spartans surged forward to recover his body, driving the Persians back 4 times before the high ground was finally lost. The survivors pulled back to a small hill called Kolonos. The Persians surrounded it. Persian archers stepped forward in ranks. The arrows came like a closing darkness. It was over. Phase 5. Athens burns. The road south was open now. Xerxes moved his army through the pass and turned toward Attica. The Greek fleet, which had been holding the naval battle at Artemisium, received word of Thermopylae's fall and withdrew. There was nothing left to protect its sea if the land was lost. Xerxes reached Athens. He found it empty. Themistocles had ordered the complete evacuation of the city days before every man, woman, and child moved to the island of Salamis and the shores of the Peloponnese. What Xerxes captured was stone and wood and the memory of a city. He burned the temples on the Acropolis anyway. The smoke could be seen from Salamis, where Athenian refugees watched their home dissolve into a column of black against the sky. But Themistocles was already planning. When the killing stopped at Thermopylae, the silence that followed was almost obscene. The pass that had run with blood for 3 days lay still. Greek bodies were stacked 4,000 total, according to Herodotus, displayed later by Xerxes as a demonstration of Persian power. Of the original 300 Spartans, not one remained alive on that field. 2 men had been absent, sent away before the final day with eye infections, and they would carry the weight of survival for the rest of their lives. One reportedly killed himself from shame. The other returned home, was shunned by his community, and died fighting recklessly at Plataea a year later, seeking the death Thermopylae had denied him. Persian losses, Herodotus estimated at 20,000. Modern historians debate the number but agree the casualties were catastrophic and psychologically devastating for Xerxes. He had expected a quick, humiliating collapse. He had received 3 days of systematic slaughter. He ordered Leonidas's head cut off and mounted on a stake, an act so unusual for Persian custom that it speaks, louder than any chronicle, to the rage and fear the Spartan king had provoked. The battlefield itself became an open grave. The hot springs still ran. The sea still pressed against the cliffs. Carrion birds gathered. The stone wall the Greeks had built lay broken and trampled, indistinguishable now from the rubble of the dead. 3 weeks later, in the narrow straits between the island of Salamis and the Athenian coast, Themistocles executed the plan Thermopylae had bought him time to set. He lured the Persian fleet 800 warships into confined waters, where their numbers were useless. The Greek triremes tore them apart. 300 Persian ships were sunk or captured. 40 Greeks were lost. Xerxes sat on a golden throne on a hillside above the strait and watched his navy cease to exist. That night, he began planning his retreat. The Persian army, severed from its naval supply chain, was suddenly the most vulnerable force on earth, stranded deep in hostile territory as winter approached. He left his general Mardonius in command and returned to Persia. The following summer, at Plataea, Mardonius died in battle and the last of Xerxes' invasion force was destroyed. The Persians never came back. After Plataea, after Mycale, after Salamis, the Achaemenid Empire turned its ambitions elsewhere. The Greek city-states, fractious, argumentative, perpetually at war with each other, had somehow held. And in the breathing space that followed, Athens entered the most extraordinary cultural explosion in ancient history. The philosophers, the playwrights, the mathematicians, the architects of the Parthenon, all of it grew from the soil of a civilization that had survived. Every idea that flows from classical Greece into Roman law, into Renaissance thought, into the principles embedded in modern democratic constitutions, all of it passed through the gate that 300 men held open with their bodies for 3 days in August of 480 BC. They did not win. Let that be clear. Thermopylae was a military defeat. The pass fell. The king died. The city burned. But defeat and failure are not the same thing. Thermopylae purchased the days Themistocles needed to set his trap at Salamis. Salamis purchased the winter that starved Xerxes' army. That winter purchased the spring of Plataea. Every link in that chain ran through a 15-meter corridor and 300 men who decided that some ground was worth more than the lives required to hold it. Centuries later, travelers passing through that coastal stretch of central Greece would find the shoreline had changed completely. Centuries of sediment from the Spercheios River have pushed the sea back nearly 5 kilometers from where it stood in 480 BC. The cliffs remain. The hot springs still bubble. And at the site where the last stand was made, a stone inscription has stood for 2.5 millennia, words composed, tradition holds, by the poet Simonides. Stranger, go tell the Spartans that here we lie, obedient to their orders, not triumphant, not lamenting, just present, still there, still holding,